Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Crosswinds Church More Than Sunday podcast. Excited that you're joining us today. I hope these podcasts have been good for you, where you're able to get a little bit of an insight into the kind of conversations we're having around here as a church every single day in the middle of this thing that's going on, and hopefully feeling a little bit engaged and connected to us through all of this. We understand that with what's happening right now, Sunday alone, and in fact, just a video on Sunday is not enough to always feel like you're still a part of this place. And so part of why we're doing this is so that you can feel that connection as best you can, and we can be a part of each other's lives a little bit more, even though we're not seeing each other in person. And today we have got a great podcast. Dr. Steve Gerali is joining us again for another Ask Dr. Gerali a Question podcast. And today we've got one about how we talk with our kids about what they're seeing on the news every single day. So I think this one might be very helpful. Enjoy this. Hey, you made it.
There it is.
I figured second time would be easier, no?
It doesn't notify me.
It didn't?
No, so I'm looking all over for where it is.
I sent you a text.
Okay, got it.
Back,
Third
Steve
time.
Gerali. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great.
I'm glad you're back on the podcast. By popular demand, you were our most listened to podcast so far in the 2.5 weeks we've been doing this.
And that's what, you've only done 2 of them?
No, we've done 13. But when I say most listened, it means people listen to your podcast as opposed to the 3.
Yeah, well, tell Andrea and the staff. Thank you.
Yeah, for real, man. Hey, how are things going down there in Claremont? Last time we talked to you, you were telling us that it was pretty slow. And fill us in a little bit. What's going on now?
Yeah, we've gone from slow to holding our breath.
Really?
Yeah, it's getting progressively slimmer. Although I have to say that Friday, Saturdays are really good, because I think about that time people are just going stir crazy.
Right.
And
so sick of being in the house. Yeah.
So we get a lot of walk-bys, that stop and grab coffee. But for the most part, we're doing about a 1/10 of what we usually do during the day.
Oh my gosh.
So, yeah.
And this just speaks to your ministry model. Again, you guys are in a coffee house, but this is not just coffee. Again, if someone's listening to this podcast and missed the last one with Steve, he started a church down there. It's called Sanctuary Coffee. It is really a whole different non-traditional model of church that is not revolving around Sunday services or anything like that. It's really revolving around mentorship, relationships, building into each other. And because of that, they've built a coffee house where people come and they buy coffee and then they sit and start talking to pastors. And now no one can come and sit. So it totally rips this out of what you guys do.
Yeah. And it was really interesting, because I had one of the council members step through today, the other day, and said, this place really isn't about coffee. And as he looked at the empty shell with nobody in here,
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it really isn't about coffee. It's about, a place to find a sanctuary,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Is there I was asking Steve before we recorded earlier, how can we help, and can we buy coffee from up here and have you ship it up? He said that doesn't really work. The cost of shipping is so astronomical. It's not helpful. Gift cards. Can we do gift cards over the phone or email you and somehow do that so that when we're down your direction, we can.
Sure, you could do that. Or, the other thing is that people are, some of the people in our community are making donations,
Yeah, right.
And because we are a nonprofit, it is tax deductible, and you can donate on our website. And so,
what's your website?
sanctuarycoffee.com.
Sanctuarycoffee.com. If you guys want to help this church down there.
I'm sorry, sanctuaryclaremont.com.
Now, whoever Sanctuary Coffee is going to get a heck of a lot of money. All 5 people who listen to the podcast are already there.
Right.
No, that's good. Yeah. So sanctuaryclaremont.com. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. And, I'll just say, we're just so indebted to that organization, what you're doing there, Steve, because we have so many of your former staff who work here now, from Matt Van Gent, our executive pastor, to Daniel Parsons, who's our high school pastor, to Sean Mackel, who is our I don't know what we call him, lighting and video director, to Chelsea Marizita Parsons, who's on our team as well, that was one of your baristas. I mean, am I missing anybody?
Well, we were indebted to you because some of them came from you first, but
True.
I mean, it's just been a great partnership all the way around, and those people, who are doing ministry at Crosswinds have done effective ministry here, and a lot of the people in this community still talk about them. So
great. Glad to hear it. That's good. Okay. Let us jump into today's question. Let me play it. Hold on.
Okay.
Hi, I have a couple of teenagers at home, and I was wondering, how do we talk to them about what they're seeing on the news? Like the medical professionals we see in their protective equipment, also the growing number of those infected and deaths. Thank you.
Wow, Steve, that is a good question. I'm a person who's got teens at home as well. And you turn on the news, you see this, and this is unlike anything I ever remember going through as a teenager. I mean, how do we begin to talk to our kids about this stuff?
Yeah, this is very new, and it's going to be frightening in a lot of ways. So let's start from with your response as a parent first. Your kids are going to take a lot of their cues from the way that you respond to this. So the very first thing that I would say is, if you're afraid, if you're in panic mode, if you're uncertain about a lot of things, and are approaching this from a very negative point of view, they're going to experience that too. Yeah. So that's the first thing I'd say. Again, last week we talked a little bit about not succumbing to fear.
Yes.
That we're free, and because of who we are in Christ, and so I think that's a perfect time to live into that and allow our kids to understand that. We don't want to minimize how bad this is. We don't want to. We don't want to downplay anything, but there's a perspective that we have to take. Either the glass is half empty or the glass is half full. And I just want to, just before I came on here, I was listening to a podcast by Dr. David Pierce, who is the chief of medicine at New York General, one of the big New York hospitals that's being ravaged by this thing.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting, his approach. He said there's two ways that this is being approached. He says one way is a realistic way. He said the other way is a panic-stricken way. And he said a lot of times what happens with the media and with these like the World Health Organization and those, they're going to give you the worst because fear motivates people to protect themselves.
Yeah.
And so what's happening is they're designing this because, let's face it, when the first wave came out, the stay-at-home thing, very few people obeyed that.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden they start throwing out all of these more intense and fearful kinds of things. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not happening, but it's not the rest of the story.
Right.
And so the glass is half full is the way that we need to approach this. So let's talk very specifically about what we say.
Okay.
I would say the first thing is we've got to be honest about this. Are people dying? Yes, people are dying, but most of these people, what they're not saying is, and I would challenge you to read some other news outlets like BBC or some of these others that will give you a broader perspective. most of them are not saying, here's how many people are walking out of the hospitals that have been cured by this.
Yeah.
And so, or they're not saying many of these people have had very severe health problems that are dying. So let's make sure that we tell our kids that there is more to the story and we don't know it all yet. Should we be concerned about this? Are people dying? Yes, they are.
Yeah.
Are we going to die? Probably not.
Right.
You know,
So part of what you do is you kind of really refocus a little bit of their attention away from just exclusively being about the death piece to also being about the recovery piece, and to say that there is definitely something going on, but maybe it's not as bad as it looks when I turn on the national news every single day.
right.
I mean, I get it. I watch it with my family, and I'm kind of a news junkie, so I've constantly, that's my go-to when I turn on the TV. Let's see what the latest thing is. And on CNN, and I don't know about the other networks, but there is a constant death toll tracker that is happening every single minute of the day, telling you what the number of infected has risen to and how many people have lost their lives because of it.
Sure. And I'd say if you really want to get your kids really giving them something to do and get them into the facts, have them Google things like death tolls on other pandemics. They're going to begin to see that this is not the queen mother of all pandemics, first of all. And again, we don't want to minimize the severity of this, but we want to put a perspective around it.
There you go.
And when our kids are living in something as opposed to seeing it online, it's a very, very different thing. So part of it is getting them into discernment mode. And that's the next thing I wanted to talk about is we've got to help kids discern the media. When they're talking about, they give sensational big numbers, and they're accurate numbers, they're big numbers of people who have tested positive. That doesn't mean that those are people who are dying or have died or are even in the hospital with this. Yeah. It means that they've tested positive. And so we've got to help our kids discern what the media is saying and hear what the media is saying effectively. You know, when they say things like this is the new normal, this is not the new normal. This is the reality of how we have to act right now.
Today. Yes. Right. Yeah.
So it's not the new normal. And those are things that make our kids frightened because if they're teenagers, they're worried about never seeing their friends again.
Do you remember, I was a child of the 80s. Steve, you're a couple of years older than me. And
just a few.
But I remember in the middle of the Cold War, a movie coming out called The Day After. Do you remember that, made for TV? Oh,
yeah.
And it was all about what's going to happen when, I believe it was Russia, when the Soviets send us a nuclear missile, or multiple maybe, and it blows up America, and we all have to somehow either lose our lives in that or come out of it. And I remember being scared to death and thinking about that movie for a long time afterwards and worried about that, right? Now, I can't even fathom what it would have been like to have in the middle of that had a 24/7 news channel that's all they talked about, and having Twitter where that's all that's being talked about, right? And not having to go to school because there's a threat that might happen in that moment. I mean, it is inundating them. It's got to be so hard to get away from it. And again, it's not like anything I ever experienced as a teen in any way.
Sure. Yeah, I know. And you know, the number one movie that's and series that's being watched on Netflix is Containment. And it's, you know, some of these sensational horror kinds of pandemic movies. Well, yeah, your kids watch that and as well, and there's nothing but doom that they begin to see. So we have to monitor a lot of that.
So discernment's a big part of this, teaching them discernment. And,
discernment is a really big part of this. And so, you know, and turn the TV off, make it fun, you know, let them FaceTime and Zoom their friends. Try and schedule some kind of routine to that, and then keep reminding your kids that this is going to end. It's not the end of the world. It's going to be over soon, and we just need to pray to that end. And this is a perfect opportunity to teach our kids about the sovereignty of God. Now that may raise a lot of other issues and a lot of other questions. And I'm all for having our kids talk more about God than they do about pandemic.
Right.
So,
right. Yeah. As that leads to other questions, those are good questions. It's okay for them to ask those questions.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And I would say this too. It's really important that if you notice that your teens, preteens are afraid or are responding in a negative way to something, ask them about it, and then sit and listen. Ask them, what are they hearing? What are they thinking? What are they feeling? Those are really important questions. And they might be sad or afraid for something that has nothing to do with the pandemic.
Yeah.
They might be afraid that because they've heard that this is affecting so many people over the age of 65, especially men, they're afraid that grandpa's going to die. Or somebody like that. And at that point, walk through precautions with them. That's why we're not visiting grandpa. So why don't you call grandpa?
Right. Right.
And that's not something that teenagers do regularly, but this is their opportunity to teach them to do that.
Sure. That's
and
good.
And get them in that proactive, positive kinds of responses.
Yeah.
But it's really important that we teach and how to combat this, and the best kinds of combat are wash your hands, stay social distance. I mean, all of these things are really important, and just talk about the fact that we're doing that. So this doctor that I just was telling you about, Dr. Pierce, he was saying that 90% of the people who do this will not get it. Will never be positive. So
90% of the people
who wash their hands and don't touch their face.
Got it.
He said, because that's the only way that you can get it is if you're in sustained, and he was really clear, sustained contact with somebody who has it.
Yeah.
And it gets on your hands and you touch your face, then you can get it. Otherwise, you can't get it.
I have never realized how much I touch my face until the last 2 weeks.
I know.
I can't stop touching my face now. It's like
I know. It's like saying, don't look over there, and all of a sudden you find yourself looking.
Yeah. No, it's a great point you're making. If we kind of follow those instructions, we're in a much better position to avoid this altogether. So, Steve, what do you say? We're talking right now a little bit about teens with this, but what do you say with people with younger kids, like your grandkids' age? What do you do with littler kids who have some ideas going on? They're not in school, or they may maybe catch some conversation between their parents or somebody else. Anything different for them?
Yeah, I'd say with younger kids, you can limit the media intake.
Yeah.
And you need to do that. So we're not going to watch the news when the kids are up. Yeah. We're not going to listen to all this stuff. We're going to protect our children. If a child, again, some of the similar things, if a child is talking about it, answer the questions age appropriately. Yeah. You don't have to go into a big discourse. And answer specifically the question. Are you going to die? No, I'm not going to die because we're at home here.
Yeah.
And nobody's sick here. And those are the kinds of ways that we have to deal with questions like that.
Now I know that to some degree, you're saying no there is a matter of statistics. If I'm following these instructions and I'm doing all these things, it is incredibly probable that I'm not going to die. But there are some people listening who might say, well, I don't know that. And maybe I'm lying to my kid. And what happens if something did ever happen to me in this moment? And my kid says, wow, my dad or my mom promised me that they wouldn't die in this thing. Why do you give that advice? What's your reasoning behind that?
Well, don't promise that you're not going to die, but give some security to your child by saying you're not going to at this point. I mean, it's discernment. I'd rather my kid be secure and comes through an understanding of this later on, and me be alive to help them explain. But it's a different question if then I die.
Yeah.
Then somebody else got to pick up the pieces and say, well, you know what? We can't make that promise, but you can't say that to a 7-year-old or a 5-year-old.
Thank you for
at
saying
this point.
I think it's such an interesting thing, especially among followers of Christ. They have this. I say they as if I'm not one. We have this thing in us that wants to be honest and forthright and forthcoming. And at the same time, that's not always the wisest thing with your little kid in a moment like this.
That's right.
To reveal every single nuance of truth to them, right?
And here's what I'll put out there. If you feel like that, anybody who's listening, if you feel like that is deceptive, then you need to deal with this long before you answer the question.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I think if you think that a response of saying, well, no, I'm going to tell my kid that I don't know if I'm going to die or not in this thing.
Yeah.
Then I'd say you have to deal with that. You have to get your theology, let your theology inform that decision.
I see. Yeah.
And but for the most part, wisdom would mandate that you say less than more.
Yeah.
And it's perfectly okay to say, you know what, people can die from anything.
Yeah.
But we're taking all the precautions here, so you don't have to worry about us dying.
Right. Yeah, that's good. That's good. You, Steve, has actually written a book on this. How to tell your kids about death, or what is the title of it?
Yeah, it's what do I do when my teenagers encounter death?
Yeah.
and despair.
So that might be another interesting phone call we can have, Steve, where we talk about that a little bit, and that's a little bit of a departure from this. It's like, well, what happens when my teenagers actually run into that? Like this
Sure.
happens. And some of us might be needing some thoughts on that too.
And I'll put this out there. It really isn't going to be an issue with your kids until one of their friends dies.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then all of a sudden it's going to be an avalanche effect.
Yeah.
And it's an entirely different animal. They're not even going to register talking about this now, because most teenagers feel that they're invincible.
Yeah.
They're probably more fearful that someone else is going to die around them than even their friends.
Yeah. Well, and that's not to say that our kids aren't wrecked if a parent or grandparent dies too. It's just to say that there's a whole nother thing that comes into play when it's somebody your age who you just never foresaw that happening.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Good. All right, man. Any other thoughts for us before we cut this thing off?
Well, again, I go back to say we need to really pray for wisdom when we're talking like this, because remember, as we've been talking for many years now about the character traits that mark the people of God, one of them is wisdom.
Yeah.
And so the most discerning people on the planet should be God's people. And if we're not talking about this in our community and in our families, then we're not worth much. So we've got Christ, the wisdom of God in us, and so we've got to trust that and bring that to our kids.
And even take
have fun with it.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Steve.
Go ahead. No. I'll close with my last thing after I'm done here.
I was going to say, even taking it away from our kids in that point, for us to even just be people of wisdom right now in our culture that is inundated with this and is still panicking. Here we are in the Bay Area 3 weeks into this, and we still don't have toilet paper on our shelves because people can't handle just buying one package.
Sure.
For us to be people who say, look, we're going to make it through this as a nation. As the people of God, we're going to make it through. There's wisdom to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
Finish what you were going to.
Well, and I, the last thing I would say is be wise in approaching this from the glasses is half full and not half empty.
Yeah.
And have fun with your kids. One of the things that I would recommend, this is a time when teenagers have to be with family. Every other time in their life, they don't. And so do things where each night somebody has to pick a thing that we all have to do, a game that we have to play or a movie that we have to watch or something like that. And then limit media time, but be sure that you give them friend time because that's the biggest thing right now in their life. Yeah. And they have to have contact with their friends. So
it's good.
And we'll get through this.
All right, Steve. Thank you so much. And again, if people would like to donate to Sanctuary Coffee, which is a church, not just a coffee house, they can go to your website, which is not sanctuarycoffee.com. It is Sanctuary Claremont, CLAREMONT.com. And we'll say this too. If you want to call in, Steve, can we do this again?
Yeah.
If you want to call in and leave us a voicemail for a question for Steve, we'd love to do that. Our number here is 925-560-3800, extension 123. And we'll try to do that on an upcoming podcast.
Hey, thanks, Chris.
All right. Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it, man. Have a good day.